Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah,
Welcome to NiCHE Conversations.
thank you. Yeah,
Back to
no, that's
NiCHE
yes, that's
Conversations.
right. Yeah, it's nice to be back.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm Jessica DeWitt, one of the editors here at the network in Canadian History and Environment. And I am lucky to be joined by Glenn Iceton today. Do you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I'm Glenn Iceton. I'm an assistant teaching professor at UNB St. John, so kind of out on the East Coast, a long ways from the Yukon right now. But yeah, I'm born and raised in Whitehorse, Yukon, and yeah, the Yukon certainly kind of holds this, a special place in my heart. And yeah,
Yes.
my research generally kind of focuses on kind of Indigenous land use and land rights and resource extraction in the Yukon Territory as well as northern British Columbia. So, yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to be talking about your PiCHE paper. So PiCHE stands for Papers in Canadian History and Environment, and it's our peer-reviewed, open access online paper, kind of like journal. And so we're going to be talking about that. And it was titled "The Land is No Longer as It Was: Land Use, Resource Extraction, and the Land Claims in the Yukon Territory." So I thought we could start off by maybe you setting the scene, what was happening in the 1970s around Indigenous land claims in Yukon, and why was there settler backlash to these land claims?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I think it's a really kind of great question. And yeah, so kind of in the kind of the to kind of set the context, right? Yeah, in kind of the late 1960s and early 1970s, right? We're seeing various Indigenous groups beginning to organize for the purpose of securing Aboriginal rights. And so in 1968, we have the formation of the Yukon Native Brotherhood, and they represented the status Indians in the Yukon Territory. And their goal quickly became to negotiate land claims with the federal government. And in 1971, we have the formation of the Yukon Association for Non-Status Indians, which represented non-status Indians within the Yukon Territory, right? And this is, of course, a legacy of the Indian Act, right? That we have the status and non-status Indians, and they all kind of eventually kind of come together under the umbrella of the Council for Yukon Indians to negotiate land claims. But kind of as this is going on, of course, there is natural resource development that is happening within the Yukon Territory as well, right? And I think if there's kind of one thing people know about kind of the Yukon's history, right? It's about the Klondike Gold Rush, right? And
Yes.
that's kind of one of those events that looms very large in the territory's history. And this has really kind of caused much of the settler population, not everybody, right, but much of the settler population to kind of look at resource extraction and mining as being very kind of integral to the development of the Yukon, despite the fact that there were many booms and busts related to this resource economy, of course, right? But once again, by the late kind of 1960s, early 1970s, you're seeing a number of kind of larger resource development projects being undertaken. You have the establishment of the lead zinc mine in Faro, the Cypress Anvil mine. You have kind of a boom in terms of gold mining in the Mayo region due to higher gold prices. So that's in the central part of the Yukon. And there's also work that's begun on the Asiac Dam, which was a major kind of hydroelectric dam in the Yukon as well, right? And at this time, it's also important to note, right, that the Yukon didn't have responsible government, right? So there was a commissioner that was kind of responsible for the Yukon, and there was a council that was elected, right? But they didn't necessarily have the same types of powers that a legislature in a province would have, right? And so there were these kind of political ambitions around kind of getting a responsible government and getting more control over the territory as well by the settler population as well. And so many would have viewed kind of these land claims as being a threat to this, right? Yeah, and so that's kind of the context of what's happening in the Yukon, right? And then there's kind of the broader kind of national and international context as well. In the neighboring state of Alaska, and in 1971, there's the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which is directly related to kind of resource extraction as well. And it was 2 weeks after the Calder decision in BC, which kind of eventually kind of results in the recognition of Aboriginal title, right? That that we see the federal government agreeing to negotiate land claims with the Yukon Native Brotherhood. So that's kind of the context behind this paper
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
That's a really good rundown. And if people want more details, of course, read the paper. It is a 76-minute read, so there's a lot of
Yeah.
details in there.
There is, yeah.
And one of the advantages of publishing a peer-reviewed paper online digitally is that you can include some media that you can't include in print. And I really enjoyed like the several audio clips that you provided in the paper that really, for me personally, dropped me into the moment. And I was wondering if you could speak to more to the sources that you use for this article.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, I really appreciated kind of having that opportunity to be able to use these sound recordings in the paper, and as you say, like that's one of the great advantages of PiCHE, right, or of papers in Canadian history and environment. And so I'd certainly recommend, just to kind of plug PiCHE, right? I mean, anyone who's kind of dealing with these types of sources, I mean, PiCHE is an excellent place to publish this stuff. And yeah, the sound recordings, yeah, I was very excited to be able to kind of use those and present them kind of as they were in the paper, right, rather than kind of just quoting them or paraphrasing them in in a print journal. And I should say that I'm very indebted to the archival staff at the Yukon Archives as well for bringing my attention to some of these sources as well, particularly Leslie Buchan, who's worked at the Yukon Archives for a very long time, and brought my attention to the David Joe speech, right, at the 1977 Land Claims Forum. Yeah, it was very, very exciting to kind of have that opportunity to use these sound recordings. In addition to the sound recordings, yeah, I used various newspaper clippings as well that were in archival files at the Yukon Archives. This included the Eric Nielsen song, and so that's Eric Nielsen was a member of Parliament for the Yukon Territory for a very long time, and the Iris Warner font as well. She was a writer and kind of historian and journalist in the Yukon Territory. And has a really great collection as well, including a number of newspaper clippings related to land claims. And then I use kind of newspapers.com to kind of follow certain stories that I kind of needed to follow that weren't necessarily kind of captured in those materials. And yeah, the Nielsen font, once again, indebted to the archival staff for kind of bringing my attention to the Nielsen font. There was quite a bit of as a member of Parliament, right? There was also a lot of correspondence as well between various constituents that kind of shed further light in terms of what I was finding in the newspapers. And there was various kind of speeches by prominent people kind of related to land claims, such as Lloyd Barber, who was the commissioner for the Indian Claims Commission, right? Yeah, and so yeah, some really great sources, right, and sources that hadn't really been used yet. Yeah, so yeah.
Wonderful. I love hearing about how other people come to the research, how they put all these stories together. So that's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so one of the things that really interested me in the paper was this kind of discussion around the role of First Nations people in the natural resource economy. So I wonder if we could wrap up by talking about, how did Indigenous and settler groups envision the role of First Nations in this resource economy at the time, and also it seemed like they had a vision going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of generally speaking, kind of on the settler side of things, in terms of kind of envisioning kind of where Indigenous peoples kind of fit within the resource economy, kind of whether people were kind of for land claims or against land claims, or somewhere in between, or perhaps agnostic when it came to land claims, right? they generally viewed kind of had this view that Indigenous peoples would kind of be kind of integrated or perhaps kind of assimilated right into kind of the into the what they refer to as the white economy of the time, right? And into that by extension, right, into that kind of natural resource economy, and kind of continuing on as kind of business as usual, right? And so kind of one prominent individual in my paper is Dan Lang, right, who starts the Society for Northern Land Research, which is an organization that's very much kind of opposed to the idea of land claims, right? And he Dan Lang becomes a politician as well, right? So becomes part of the part of the legislature, and very much kind of opposing land claims, and really kind of views or has the view that the best way forward is for Indigenous peoples to kind of assimilate into the settler economy here, which once again kind of includes that kind of resource extraction. And then there were also individuals who and organizations who supported land claims, but still kind of had this view that Indigenous peoples kind of needed to kind of integrate into that once again into that natural resource economy. Ian MacKay, who was the president of the Whitehorse Chamber of Commerce, right? And that's kind of one of the sound recordings that I have in my paper, right? Is kind of him talking about kind of talking about the future of kind of land use for Indigenous peoples, and kind of acknowledges that yes, hunting and trapping will happen or will continue to happen, right? But suggests that Indigenous peoples need to participate in what he refers to as the white economy, right? Meaning once again kind of natural resource development. There's the odd person who has perhaps more nuanced view, and Lloyd Barber is kind of one of these individuals, and he like even before Ian MacKay's kind of presentation, right? Lloyd Barber gives a presentation to the Whitehorse Chamber of Commerce, where he suggests that Indigenous peoples are going to have a different view over kind of the value of the land that doesn't necessarily fit into that kind of neoliberal valuing of the land that kind of ties once again into resource development. And so there are some kind of nuances in there, but generally speaking, kind of the Indigenous organizations had much more kind of nuanced views around Indigenous peoples and natural resource development, and it wasn't necessarily like a flat out kind of opposition to resource development, right? But it was finding a way to make sure that Indigenous peoples certainly benefited from the resource development and had some participation in it, but also trying to ensure that it didn't kind of foreclose on kind of traditional activities on the land as well, right? And I think that's really nicely captured in the David Joe audio clip that I have in the paper, right, where he kind of talks about with land claims, right? It's giving Indigenous people the chance to participate in the settler economy, but also continue to be Indigenous, right, and continue to carry out their traditional activities on the land as well. So it's not necessarily looking at things as kind of business as usual type of resource development.
Yeah. I really appreciated this example and these sources of Indigenous peoples, really grappling with reality. Like there's often a black and white portrayal or thought of like, oh, Indigenous people are against natural resource extraction and, settlers are for it. And oftentimes, they're dealing with the realities of what they're dealing with, right? They can't necessarily say all out no resource extraction, etc. But figuring out how to make it work to their advantage, and I really appreciate that part of the story that you're telling. Overall, it's just like a really wonderful paper. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend everyone check it out. Thank you for joining me today, Glenn.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed, having this opportunity to talk about my paper. And I think these niche conversations are such a wonderful idea to kind of, get people out there kind of talking about what they're doing. And it's always nice to kind of hear about what other people are up to. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
take care, Glenn. It was so nice to
You too.
see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, thank you.